Thank you, Gary, for your generous introduction. Gary did say we've known each other a long time, and I've known him to be a crybaby for a long time. So I fully expected him to lose it in the course of that. It was very nice. I want to thank you also. See, by the way, this whole side of the room are Gary's guests. They know him well. And that's why they all giggle with recognition when I describe him as a crybaby. I want to thank you, Gary, also for your leadership of Habitat for so many years and for your friendship for many more. Chairman Cullen and members of the board, Executive Director Gail Luxembourg, and members of the staff, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your warm welcome and for coming out this afternoon to support Habitat for Humanity's work in Seattle and throughout King County. And what important work. Gary, Gail, and your site manager, Brett Van Slyke, took me out to Westway, a Habitat neighborhood of focus, on Saturday. Brett told stories about the homeowners and the volunteers and the relationships they've built with the neighbors and with each other over many years, and some 60 or more houses Habitat has built, renovated, or helped homeowners to repair. They told stories about the miraculous Diane Gallegos and how much she, and through her, Habitat has invested in lifting a whole neighborhood, how much vision, persistence, and hard work that took. In Westway, I saw more than tidy houses. I saw pride and order and possibility. It struck a familiar chord. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I lived there in a two-bedroom tenement with my grandparents, my mother and sister, and various other relatives who came and went. My mother, my sister, and I shared one of those bedrooms and a set of bunk beds. So you'd rotate from the top bunk to the bottom bunk to the floor every third night on the floor. I got my break when I was 14, and with the help of a scholarship from A Better Chance, landed sight unseen at Milton Academy outside of Boston, which for me was like landing on a different planet. Now, our daughters, Sarah and Catherine, grew up very differently. By the time they got to high school, they had traveled on several continents, knew how to use and pronounce a concierge, and had shaken hands in the White House with the President of the United States. In kindergarten, our youngest daughter, Catherine, was studying the changes in the seasons, summer, fall, winter, spring. Her homework assignment was to describe the four seasons to Mom and Dad. So when her mom asked her to begin, Catherine proceeded to describe her several visits to the Four Seasons Hotel in Washington, D.C. First, you drive up and the doorman takes your car, she said. 5 years old. One generation. One generation. And the circumstances of my life, my family's life, were completely transformed. Now, that story does not get told as often as we'd like in this country, but it gets told more often in this country than any other place on earth. That is an American story. That story, Maria's story, your stories, and stories like it are central to the American story and to the work of Habitat. In the 50s and the 60s in my neighborhood, everything was broken. Broken playgrounds, broken sidewalks, broken houses, broken homes. There was a lot we didn't have, but one thing we did have was a very strong sense of community, the kind where every child was under the jurisdiction of every single adult on the block. So if you messed up down the street in front of Ms. Jones's, she'd go upside your head as if you were hers, and then call home. So you got it 2 times. What those adults were trying to get across to us was that membership in a community is seeing your stake in your neighbor's dreams and struggles as well as your own. That we are better turning to each other rather than turning on each other. In these fractious times, rebuilding that sense of community is critical. I'm convinced that in all times, but especially nowadays, people crave a sense of community, of common cause and common destiny. That's fundamentally what Habitat is about. After all the impressive stats about units built and families served, I think building community is impossible without seeing the people behind the stats, behind the policy. In my work as governor, I tried to remember that there are human beings behind policy choices, strivers and strugglers with aspirations and frustrations and anxieties. I tried to make policy matter where it touches people. Most of the people I met and served didn't want or expect government to solve every problem in their lives. They just wanted government to do its part to help them help themselves. A good school, a safe neighborhood, an expanding economy and the tools to ready themselves for it, a decent road, safe bridges, convenient trains. When I hear the conventional policy debates about charter schools and teachers' unions, taxes and spending, regulation and free markets, it strikes me that both liberals and conservatives have mastered their respective sound bites, but lost sight of the people at the end of those choices. By the way, it's easy to lose sight. Jobs like governor are a blend of substance and performance art. And it feels like more and more of what counts, or at least what gets reported, is the performance and less the substance. When I left office last year, Massachusetts was first in the nation in student achievement, economic competitiveness, healthcare coverage, energy efficiency, entrepreneurial activity, veteran services, and so much more. We were at a 25-year high in employment. We had reformed more of state government than any administration in decades. Our budgets were sound. Our bond rating was the highest in Commonwealth history. And still, I wonder, as anyone would, I think, in these days where sensationalism counts for so much, whether any of that substance ultimately counts. It's funny how the value of one's work reveals itself. In 2010, with the help of our legislature and many grassroots advocates, we passed a significant reform to our CORI system. This is the system that tracks every offender's criminal record, and it had become a practical barrier for many people with minor offenses who were trying to get back into productive life. So we took on the task of fixing it, much as I understand you have undertaken to do here in Washington State. When our bill was complete, we hosted a signing ceremony in a packed, un-air-conditioned building in Roxbury, a tough neighborhood in Boston, on what felt like the hottest day in the history of time. Hundreds of people came and excitement was high. In the midst of this joyous pandemonium after I signed the bill, a man handed me his cell phone and asked me to speak with his friend. The voice at the other end of the line thanked me for signing the bill and said he knew it would make a difference in his life. I smiled, said I hope so, handed the phone back, and thought nothing more of it. 4 years later, I arrived early for an event in Springfield, a city in western Massachusetts. We decided to grab lunch at a restaurant down the block from the Basketball Hall of Fame. The troopers I was with and I were waiting for our takeout near the front of the restaurant when a man in chef's togs walked past. He stopped and he did a double take, which, by the way, was a frequent reaction I got. I attribute to being taller on TV. The man said, "Are you Governor Patrick?" I said, "Yes." Then he asked, "Do you remember signing CORI reform?" I said, "Sure I do." He said, "Do you remember speaking to a guy on a cell phone right after you signed the bill that day?" I said, "As a matter of fact, I do." He said, "I was that guy. I was sitting in prison when you took that call. When I got out, I got this job on account of CORI reform." That man is the executive chef in that restaurant today. That policy touched a person, and I believe that lasts. There are statistics to show the aggregate results and awards to recognize the body of work that my team contributed. But that day reminded me, as I have been reminded countless times before and since, that what matters more is beyond the statistics and surveys. It's the human souls behind the policy choice we make. There are families behind the affordable housing program, travelers behind the bridge or road project, children behind the line item for schools. Sure, we have to balance budgets, and we did that. But if we don't see the people behind the budget, the meek as well as the mighty, what really is the point? So it was important for me to go out to Westway to see where the work of Habitat in Kings County is touching people. That's where it matters. That's why I was so impressed with the intimacy of the stories that Brett and Gail and Gary told about the families you've served. And I'm proud to report to you that your work clearly matters. You who support Habitat are making it possible for families to organize stable lives, children to imagine a better future and then to reach for it. There is nothing like a home of your own. It's a stabilizing force, a sanctuary, a haven for renewal, a source of optimism, as Maria so beautifully described it, a personal and familial center. Because more than having housing, building a future requires hope. Certainly growing up as I did taught me to value, indeed to cherish, a home of my own. And my wife Diane and I have worked hard over the years to provide that kind of home to our daughters, to other family members, and lots of what we lovingly call strays, helping to center others and through them enriching our own lives. And through that home, we help to build a community. That is a lasting lesson of the South Side for me, that the destination is community. The interconnectedness of a decent school, safe streets, a good playground, an open space, local commerce, the many features that create a platform for achievement and make a life complete. It's about seeing your stake in your neighbors' dreams and struggles as well as your own. It's about a reason to hope. And so I applaud you for focusing energy on building community, not just a single home, because building community catalyzes other important change. Policymakers and advocates often find it's too much to take on related issues. Focus on doing one thing at a time well and leave the rest to others. But I suggest to you that while doing everything is usually unrealistic, doing a little more is not just doable, but profoundly impactful. Because regular people understand how interconnected issues are in their own everyday lives. They understand that to have a job downtown doesn't mean a thing without a means to get to and from it. They understand that having a new school building doesn't mean a thing without a well-prepared and well-supported teacher in front of the classroom and a safe street to walk along to get to it. So thinking as you have in Westway about how to lift a whole community makes a difference. That's what it means to see the people behind the policy, I think, their whole selves, their whole aspirations. And while I know it's a challenge to think big in a time of small thinking, I know it's tough to reach out at a time of husbanding resources and piled high demands. Doing a little more means a lot more to the people Habitat is dedicated to serve. And finally, I want to thank you for your compassion. I know that Habitat depends on the sort of hard-headed business and professional leaders who are here today, and that Habitat, like every civic or government enterprise, needs to be effective and accountable to earn everyone's support. But in these times of mendacity, these times when the mighty make a habit of belittling the meek, I feel I want to acknowledge and thank you for your kindness. It feels a little like we've forgotten to honor compassion without hesitation and apology. Yet you and I know that in the end, without compassion, we will never be whole. Honestly, I think the nation craves compassion of precisely the kind Habitat's work represents. And I'll offer a story to tell you why I'm so convinced this is so. 2 summers ago, the Obama administration asked a number of states temporarily to shelter some of the refugee children stranded on our southern border, you may remember. unaccompanied children, some as young as 3 and 4 years old, were flooding across the border, having fled over thousands of miles from violence in Central America, and the federal authorities were overwhelmed. Now, feelings around immigration run hot, I get that. But to me, accepting the challenge to temporarily shelter these poor children was an act of both patriotism and faith. We are an extraordinary nation. Unlike any other superpower, America's power, to paraphrase a great man, comes from giving, not from taking. As a consequence of that generosity, America has given sanctuary to desperate children for centuries. We have rescued Irish children from famine, Russian and Ukrainian children from religious persecution, Cambodian children from genocide, Haitian children from earthquakes, Sudanese children from civil war, and New Orleans children from Hurricane Katrina. Once in 1939, we turned our backs on Jewish children fleeing the Nazis, and it remains a blight on our national reputation. The point is that this good nation is great when we open our doors and our hearts to needy children, and diminished when we don't. The faith point was equally important to me. Jews and Christians are taught that if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him, but rather love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In my faith tradition, we are admonished to take in the stranger, for inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, Christ tells us, you did it to me. Every major religious tradition on the planet charges its followers to treat others as we ourselves wish to be treated. Still, I knew our offer of shelter would be controversial. Indeed, for that, on hate radio, I was called everything but a child of God. A couple of weeks later, on a free weekend morning, my wife Diane gave me a list of stuff she wanted from the local Home Depot. It was early in the day, and I thought I would just run out quickly on my own without bothering my security detail, which, by the way, is something the troopers did not like. But I knew exactly where I was going and where to find everything on my list. So I jumped in the truck, dressed in my jeans, T-shirt, flip-flops, a baseball cap, and dark glasses. Didn't matter. I was outed by the manager in the very first aisle. "Good morning, Mr. Patrick. Welcome to Home Depot. How can I help you?" I encountered a man in the checkout line who was angry, not rude or threatening, just angry and loud. He said, "Governor, I couldn't disagree more with you about your offer to shelter these children." He said, "My own wife is an immigrant. She came here legally, and that's the way it ought to be. I think you ought to know that I think you are wrong." I thanked him for his feedback. Let me tell you, it was clear to everyone in the checkout line who was mad at whom and what he was mad about. I had 6 other encounters on the same subject in the store that morning. In each of the others, someone came up and whispered, "Governor, I'm with you." Or, "Governor, you're doing the right thing." Or, "Governor, thank you for doing right by those children." The calls to the office were 3-1 in favor of sheltering those kids. It struck me how we've come to whisper kindness and shout our anger, and how upside down that has become. We need to learn to shout for justice, to shout for compassion, to shout love. Habitat's work, it seems to me, is all about that, and so too is your support. And for that critical and timely example, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. It's an honor to be with you. Thanks for having me.